Week 1 is here. We made it. Football is back, and I am back on the channel. I do apologize for my absence. In case you guys weren't aware, I also make content for the 4for4 YouTube channel. So with it being redraft season and all, my schedule was pretty filled with making videos over there. So if you play in redraft leagues and you want my content for that space, head over and subscribe to the new 4for4 YouTube channel. I'll throw that link down in the description. But if you search for it on here, it's the one with under 1,000 subs because we just made it and started it at the beginning of August. Anyway, now that we have football this week, what better way to start the season and week 1 than with a good old waiver wire video highlighting every single player to pick up and stash before games begin later this week. First and foremost, I do want to highlight a couple of players that are highly rostered but not 100% rostered that I think need to be, and that includes, very long list here, Dylan Gabriel, Will Shipley, Sean Tucker, Kendre Miller, Kareem Hunt, Keaton Mitchell, Taj Brooks, Ollie Gordon, DJ Giddens, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Kyle Monangai, Torrey Horton, Jalen Coker, Amari Cooper, Michael Wilson, Theo Johnson, Jatavion Sanders, Chig Okonkwo, Mike Gesicki, Juwan Johnson, Darren Waller, and Oronde Gadsden. Again, all of these guys are rostered in well over 90% of Dynasty leagues out there, but they're not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wire and immediately add these guys if they are available. Now, first on the list is grouping all of the backup quarterbacks into just one quick section, specifically in Superflex Dynasty leagues. And I will be ordering these guys based on how I would prioritize them on waivers, but if you have the starter above them, I am on board with prioritizing them first so you have your quarterback handcuffs, so to speak. Now, the highest upside backup for fantasy in the entire league right now is Joe Milton for the Dallas Cowboys, both because of his own potential, but also because Dak Prescott has missed 5 or more games in 3 of the past 6 seasons. If Dak were to get hurt again this year, Milton has a ton of upside throwing to CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, and Jake Ferguson, plus having the ultimate Konami code upside with his rushing ability. Jimmy Garoppolo is next in priority because of all of the injury concerns with Matthew Stafford this year, being held out of practice, requiring an epidural, etc. If Matthew Stafford can't deal with the pain or even aggravates the injury enough for an extended absence, Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the most NFL-capable backups in the league, playing in a Sean McVay system, throwing to Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. The ceiling may not be that high, but the floor is enough to survive as a low-end quarterback too, and if he happens to throw 250 and 2 touchdowns or 303 every now and then that's a win for you if you're starting Jimmy G. Next up is Jake Browning for the Cincinnati Bengals. The benefit with Browning is that we've already seen him succeed in this offense for fantasy football just 2 years ago. In 7 games played, Browning averaged 20 fantasy points per game as a top 7 fantasy quarterback to end the 2023 season, pacing for 4,500 yards and 27 touchdowns with a healthy rushing floor too. When you consider the offense and the weapons that he has to throw to, plus Joe Burrow's injury history and an offensive line that seems set on injuring him again this year, Browning is a great stash for anyone in Superflex leagues, but especially if you have Joe Burrow. Now, this may be a hot take, but my next priority backup quarterback to add is actually Carson Wentz, and I considered putting him above Browning and Garoppolo for just one simple reason: Kevin O'Connell. Obviously, Kirk Cousins was great for fantasy in Minnesota, but also remember the weeks where Nick Mullins was out there throwing for 300 to 400 yards and 2 touchdowns every week. Josh Dobbs was a top 10 fantasy quarterback for 4 weeks with the Minnesota Vikings. And then, of course, Sam Darnold's massive season last year. The last time we saw Carson Wentz as a full-time starter was the beginning of 2022 with the Washington Commanders, when he was the QB8 over the first 5 weeks. And in 2021 with the Indianapolis Colts, he was the QB14 on the year. And in his one start with the LA Rams in Week 18 of 2023, he led the team to a win over the Niners and put up 27 fantasy points as the QB2 on the week. If JJ McCarthy were to get hurt and Wentz took over for any length of time this year, he could be a fantasy QB1 just like most of his time since leaving Philadelphia and like pretty much how every quarterback has been under Kevin O'Connell. He is by far the most available backup quarterback on waivers in Dynasty because he just signed a few days ago, and also could be one of the best backups for fantasy in the entire league. Now, next up is Famous Jameis, because there is a strong likelihood that he gets a chance to start at some point this year when the Giants inevitably bench Russell Wilson. Now, even if they do go directly to Jackson Dart whenever they bench Wilson, if Dart were to get hurt, Jameis could come in and then gets to throw the ball 50 times a game to Malik Neighbors. I mean, it is just Jameis Winston. Maybe there's also a possibility that he gets traded at some point to a team that really needs a quarterback, but it's Jameis Winston. He's just going to throw a bunch whenever he gets in the game. So what more do I really need to say here? Add him if he's on waivers. Now, next up is Malik Willis, who was able to showcase his abilities in Jordan Love's stead for a couple of games last year, scoring 13 and then 25 fantasy points in his 2 starts early in 2024. He's in a great offense, great offensive system, has got good weapons to throw to, and has the coveted rushing ability that we love in fantasy football. So Malik Willis is also a great stash in Superflex leagues, again, especially if you have Jordan Love. Now, Trey Lance looked solid in the preseason game for the Chargers, and I can't deny the weapons that he would have if Justin Herbert were to get hurt. Plus, Lance is a very productive rusher too. He's averaged 27 rushing yards per game in the 5 games that he's played over 50% of snaps, and he's eclipsed 40 rushing yards in 3 of those 5 games. He's not a tremendous passer, never has been, probably won't ever be, but maybe with more time spent in the NFL and learning in 3 different offenses now, maybe he can improve now throwing to Ladd McConkey and company in LA, especially when you pair that with his rushing upside. And lastly, I do find it odd that the Jets decided to only keep Tyrod Taylor behind Justin Fields, given Tyrod's age and his just overall lack of upside, especially when compared to Justin Fields, but you can't deny the experience that he brings to the table entering his 15th season. I will say, we really shouldn't underestimate Tyrod's abilities for fantasy, since the last time we saw him start games was in 2023 for the New York Giants, where in 4 full games, he averaged 273 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, and 50 rushing yards per game, which is nearly 19 to 20 fantasy points per game. And that was a Giants team before Malik Neighbors, with Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, and Darren Waller to throw to. Tyrod was doing that for fantasy in that offense. Justin Fields has never played a full season in his career, either from injury or just straight up being benched, both of which are still possibilities this season with the New York Jets. If Tyrod were to get a chance to play with better weapons than he had in 2023, or at least one better wide receiver in Garrett Wilson, plus his overall rushing upside, he could be a more than capable spot starter for you this season. Now, just like with the quarterbacks, I have a handful of very good backup running backs to check your waivers for and add immediately. Stashing these handcuffs now and beating all of the injuries coming soon is the best way to save fab in season, but also have the opportunity to either flip these guys to your league mates for a profit or actually use them for yourself for production. They're completely useless right now, but in a few weeks, these guys could be invaluable, and stashing as many as you can also gives you the best odds to be affected positively by every running back injury in season. So once again, this is the order in which I would prioritize these handcuffed running backs currently on Dynasty waivers. The first is Dameon Pierce, who I am very surprised to see Pierce's availability above 10% in the Dynasty leagues that I pull data from on myfantasyleague.com. If you are new to this video this year, over 10% is a relatively high number for a fairly household name who still has relevance in the NFL. There is a more than fair chance that Dameon Pierce is better than both Nick Chubb and Woody Marks right now. And as we go through the season, that could play out to where Dameon Pierce is getting more and more work every week until he is eventually the main RB1. The other possibility is just being a really good handcuff to Nick Chubb, who has been hurt 2 years in a row now. I personally don't believe Joe Mixon plays at all this year, so having a shot on the starting running back in Houston, especially having already seen Pierce's fantasy production as the starter for this team, plus Joe Mixon's volume and production last year, this is an easy add if Pierce is still available on waivers. Now, in a similar situation, Chris Rodriguez could be the more 2-down RB1 for the Commanders after the Brian Robinson trade. And I know, the reason why the Washington Commanders were fine trading away Brian Robinson was because of Bill Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. But Rodriguez is a very capable running back with a shot at being the higher volume and goal line guy for a high-powered offense, especially if Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt were to get hurt, as he already dealt with a shoulder injury in training camp, missed practice, and the final preseason game because of it. Chris Rodriguez would be right in line to be the RB1B with Austin Eckler, who is also no stranger to injuries. We've seen this team go through multiple running backs over the past couple of years, so why not just stash and roster Chris Rodriguez in case he were to become the main RB1 for a very, very good team. Now, next up, I do give a slight nod to new rookie running back Khalil Mullings as the RB2 behind Tony Pollard now, with Tyjae Spears on IR for at least 1 month. Mullings was a very fun prospect. He's actually a linebacker turned running back at Michigan. He rushed for 950 yards and 12 touchdowns in 2024, splitting the backfield with Donovan Edwards. He's not a prolific pass catcher, but he is a big dude who can run downhill, and he has a nose for the end zone. Tony Pollard has actually kind of been an Iron Man in his career, but he does feel a bit more injury prone than your average running back, and with Spears out of the way for a month, Mullings could get an early opportunity if Tony Pollard were to get hurt early. In a very similar situation to Mullings, Emmanuel Wilson once again finds himself as the main backup to Josh Jacobs since Marshawn Lloyd's body just completely hates him and refuses to stay healthy. Josh Jacobs has also been slightly injury prone throughout his career, mainly just due to the sheer volume that he receives every year and will receive once again in 2025. So should Josh Jacobs miss any time, Emmanuel Wilson is an interesting flex option in a great offense with a small showcasing of potential last year with game logs of 14 for 73 and 1, 11 for 52 and 1, and 12 for 50, plus an extra reception or two doesn't hurt either. Next on the list, we have Raheem Mostert, who is old. He's not that great, but is pretty much the only running back behind Ashton Genty. He cannot go ignored. Of all the backups that I mentioned, Mostert feels like the one with the lowest ceiling and the one behind the healthiest and cleanest injury history of all the NFL starters right now in Ashton Genty. Still though, when your competition for touches behind you is Zamir White, you should be on Dynasty rosters. And as a final stash option for running back, and one that should be available in many leagues out there, LaQuint Allen is a name that you should know. If you've watched my content on this channel, you would know I was actually a pretty big fan of Allen as a prospect this year coming out of Syracuse. He was used as a 3-down workhorse, has a tremendous production profile as a receiver out of the backfield. He was the second rookie drafted by the Jaguars later on day 3 after Bashal Tutin, but he has been noticed by Liam Cohen in both minicamp and training camp this summer. He's been noted as their best pass blocker at the position, and he has the versatility to line up in the slot too, which could be especially helpful for a team that's lacking receiver talent behind Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter, especially if Hunter isn't playing a full set of snaps offensively. The path for LaQuint Allen is very muddy. I 100% understand that he's the RB4 on the team, but with a ton of rumors spreading around the possibility of trading Travis Etienne and or Tank Bigsby, the path for Allen would open up a lot more if one of those guys is moved, especially if the guy is Travis Etienne, then the receiving role out of the backfield could be taken over by LaQuint Allen. We need multiple stones to fall for Allen to have fantasy relevance, but we have seen team RB3s and RB4s become relevant all the time every year. Last year, we saw relevant weeks from Sean Tucker and Isaiah Davis and Jeremy McNichols, and technically, Isaac Guerrero was the Niners' RB3 entering the season last year. It's not impossible, especially in this Jaguars backfield, and as a very available stash, especially in deeper leagues, you could do a lot worse. Now, before we get to the wide receivers, I do want to shout out one tight end on this list today, which is everybody's favorite New Orleans Saints player, Taysom Hill. He will begin the season on the PUP list, so he's out for at least 4 weeks, and he is an older player coming off of an ACL injury. But when I look around this entire Saints roster, I can't help but notice a complete lack of playmakers that if Taysom Hill could return to form, I would think that Kellen Moore could use a man of his very diverse talents. A reminder for you, Hill averaged 12.9 PPR fantasy points per game last year, which is actually 6th at the tight end position behind Jonnu Smith and above Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and Sam Laporta. Granted, that was mostly due to one crazy 42-point game, but removing that game, he still averaged almost 9 PPR points per game in the rest of the games played, slightly behind Pat Freiermuth and Tucker Kraft, and ahead of TJ Hawkinson, Mike Gesicki, Dalton Kincaid, and Kyle Pitts. I have also said multiple times this year, whether it's in other videos or on a podcast or just BSing with somebody else in the industry, that Taysom Hill is probably the Saints' best quarterback on the team right now. Now, that comment is mostly said in jest, but the current Saints quarterback room has made absolutely zero attempts to even refute that take. So maybe Taysom gets a gradually role in what is hopefully an upgraded offense under Kellen Moore, but also has the ultimate upside of possibly getting snaps at quarterback if/when Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shuck fail to qualify as NFL caliber quarterbacks. If you have an empty IR spot on your roster, you can add Taysom Hill now, throw him on your IR as a free spot that takes up 0 actual roster spots, then see what happens when Taysom Hill returns in a little over a month. Now, this next name is kind of insane to me. It's Keandre Lambert-Smith, who is available in 12% of leagues in myfantasyleague.com. My guess is that on the leagues that he's available, those are leagues that have closed waivers during the offseason that open heading into week 1. And if you play in one of those leagues, or KLS is still somehow available on waivers in your league, you need to add him immediately. Once again, fans of this channel would have heard me recommend grabbing KLS in the last round of your rookie drafts or immediately after if he went undrafted back in May because of the upside he has already shown during this preseason. He's just a really, really good wide receiver, and he only has to pass Quentin Johnston and Trey Harris to have the wide receiver 3 role on the team in 2025, not to mention in 2026 and beyond when Keenan Allen's 1-year deal expires. Justin Herbert has already said that he loves him. I would not be shocked if KLS is everyone's favorite end-of-season trade and stash target, but you could get him right now on waivers in August of 2025 and look like an absolute wizard to the rest of your league. Now, very similarly, Malik Washington is the wide receiver 3 still in Miami, but there are avenues for success in 2025 and then, of course, long-term in an offense without Tyreek Hill. If Tyreek is actually starting to fade or injuries actually prevent him from playing this year, Washington is a very talented player who fits this Dolphins offense perfectly, where Jalen Waddle can then be the new Tyreek Hill, and then Washington is kind of the new Jalen Waddle. Tyreek has also been a popular trade candidate at the deadline this year if Miami isn't winning games and Mike McDaniel's time comes to an end in Miami and they kind of start to rebuild things. Even as the wide receiver 3, though, Washington can still make noise for fantasy, especially if Miami's offense returns to the firepower they had in 2023. But there are avenues, as I mentioned, for a bigger role if Tyreek were to get hurt, if Jalen Waddle were to get hurt or move on just down the road. He's highly rostered already, but I wanted to highlight him more than just including him in that double check section because I do still strongly believe in Malik Washington heading into year 2. Now, to start grouping some of these wide receivers together that you should be adding right now, I think shots on Trey Tucker, Darius Slayton, and Kayshon Boutte are solid adds right now before the season starts, just to see what happens. All 3 of these guys are probably going to end up being nothing and could be one of the first to get cut for better players that pop up in season in September or in October. But at the very least, they have roles in their offenses and pathways for fantasy relevance. Trey Tucker is the potential wide receiver 2 for the Raiders right now, which is still really more like the wide receiver 3 because of Brock Bowers, but he at least has that role today. Jack Besh can't get on the field right now. Deontay Thornton seems to have locked down the speedster role that Tucker originally had, but if Tucker is playing more snaps and he's playing out of the slot, he could have relevance in a better offense under Chip Kelly with a quarterback upgrade in Geno Smith. And especially because of all this Jacoby Myers stuff is still kind of up in the air right now at the time of this recording, maybe Jacoby Myers gets traded and then Trey Tucker's pathway to relevance and usage increases from that. Now, Darius Slayton is the wide receiver 2-3 on the Giants, still running across from Malik Neighbors in 2 wide receiver sets and then on the outside on 3 wide receiver sets when Wan'Dale Robinson is in the slot. There is potential that either Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, or Jackson Dart just make this offense better than what they had with Daniel Jones. And if it is better, Slayton could have a solid role with a decent amount of targets because they can't all go to Malik Neighbors, right? Then as for Kayshon Boutte, he might have technically fallen out of a starting role because of the additions of Stephon Diggs and Kyle Williams, but Diggs is getting older and is still coming off of an ACL injury, and Kyle Williams has been hurt for a couple of weeks now. Boutte showed great rapport with Drake May last year, and even though he fell in the NFL draft, he was still a very high upside prospect from his time at LSU. Maybe he is starting to figure things out, and maybe a better offense and offensive system helps bring that out of him even more. Now, like I said, worst case scenario, we find out very quickly that these guys just aren't worth a roster spot, or you just happen to drop these guys in season whenever better names pop up. But best case scenario, you beat your league on a free waiver ad right now because you were the most active or the most willing to take a shot and churn out the back end of your bench. And finally, we get to the last grouping of wide receivers, which are just pure stash and hopeful players. Afton Chisholm has made a ton of noise as the next UDFA gem for the New England Patriots. He's scrappy, he's gritty, he's sneaky athletic with a high motor, a real student of the game type, good fundamentals, high IQ, first one in, last one out kind of guy. For all the things that I just said about Kayshon Boutte, maybe that actually applies to Chisholm in what is hopefully an upgraded Patriots offense. Tyquan Thornton appears to have carved out the role as the speedster for the Kansas City Chiefs, and with Rashee Rice's 6-game suspension, he could have relevance very early on. Obviously, any wide receiver who plays with Patrick Mahomes immediately has our attention, especially ones who can catch 70-yard touchdowns like it's nothing. Maybe he is just a fun one catch a week kind of highlight reel kind of guy who is better just for Patrick Mahomes' value, or maybe he is actually something a little bit more. And it wouldn't be a waiver wire video if I wasn't hyping up my guy Jacob Cowing. Now, I am beyond frustrated that Cowing is hurt again in what should have been the best possible offseason to make a name for himself in this current wide receiver core for the 49ers. But I am hoping that he can get healthy and get back on track in season and be an actual weapon for Brock Purdy that the Niners seem to desperately need right now. This is very similar to Taysom Hill's advice, where if you have empty roster spots on your IR, add Jacob Cowing, toss him on the IR to start the year until you need those spots for other injuries or just to delay the decision of what to do with him when he does return.